Have you ever walked into your own home, the place meant to be your sanctuary, and instead felt a subtle, almost invisible pressure closing in? It's not about grand chaos or broken appliances. It's the quiet hum of 100 undone tasks. The jacket still draped over a chair, yesterday's mail unopened on the counter, a teacup by the sink, a ghost of a morning coffee. It's not an emergency, but it's certainly not peace either. For too long, my home felt less like a haven and more like a never-ending to-do list, a space I simply passed through rather than truly lived within. I yearned for clarity, for a lightness of being that seemed forever out of reach. And then, everything shifted the day I stepped across the threshold of a small, unassuming house on a quiet suburban street and met an 80-year-old Japanese woman named Noro. Her home was tiny, yet it held more peace than any mansion. It was a place where your heart exhaled, where every corner felt intentional, kind. What I learned from Noro, not through grand lectures, but through the gentle rhythm of her daily life, were 7 quiet habits. These weren't difficult disciplines requiring immense strength or wealth, but subtle shifts in perspective, simple acts of living that required only an open heart and a willingness to embrace a different way. If you, like me, have ever longed for less weight in your home and more expansive room in your soul, then this story, this journey, is for you. Let me take you there. Let me show you what I saw, one gentle habit at a time. There was a time not so long ago when I would wake up already carrying the quiet burden of my surroundings. It wasn't physical exhaustion from a poor night's sleep, but a mental weariness born from the silent accusations of my own home. The living room wasn't a place for relaxation. It was a visible manifestation of my procrastination, a constant reminder of things yet to be done. The kitchen seemed to whisper with unwashed dishes and stacks of unopened mail, each piece a small insistent demand on my attention. Even my bedroom, the supposed sanctuary of rest, had laundry piled on a chair that had seen more fabric than human form in months. I'd always tell myself, I'll tackle it this weekend, but weekends would blend into weeks, and weeks into months, transforming my living space into little more than a thoroughfare, a place I traversed rather than inhabited. I didn't initially grasp the profound connection, how the visible clutter around me was mirroring, amplifying the unseen clutter within my mind. This wasn't the dramatic mess you see in movies. It was a subtle, insidious weight that accumulated day by day, leaving me with a persistent nagging feeling of being perpetually behind, even when I was standing perfectly still. It's a peculiar thing, isn't it? How a home, your home, can slowly become unfamiliar, a silent stranger. How you can reside within its walls for years, yet feel a persistent sense of unease, a feeling that something fundamental is just not right. One ordinary day, the words simply escaped my lips, a soft, almost involuntary confession. This place doesn't feel like me anymore. It was such a simple phrase, yet it resonated deeply, staying with me. It wasn't born of sadness or despair, but of a quiet readiness, a profound yearning for change. I wasn't seeking a larger house or more storage solutions or trendy organizational bins. What I truly needed was something far more fundamental, a way to reclaim that sense of home within myself, starting not with the sheer volume of things I owned, but with the very nature of my relationship to them. And that's precisely when our paths converged. Noro, an 80-year-old woman whose face held the gentlest of smiles, resided in a home so imbued with stillness that it felt as though you could hear your own thoughts distinctly. She offered no grand lectures, no exhaustive lists of rules. Her approach wasn't about purging or rigid adherence to minimalism. She simply lived in a way that radiated lightness, clarity, and a profound, quiet intentionality. It was a rainy Tuesday when I first crossed paths with Noro. I was visiting a friend in the quiet suburbs, and as we ambled along a row of unassuming homes, one particular small house caught my eye. It wasn't striking in its grandeur or newness. The paint had faded gracefully. The garden was humble, yet there was an undeniable aura of stillness about it, as if time itself had paused in reverence for that single dwelling. An old Japanese woman lives there, my friend remarked. She keeps to herself, but everyone says her home is always spotless. Spotless. The word echoed in my mind not because I harbored any desire for sterile perfection, but because it hinted at something deeper, a profound longing for peace. Weeks later, through a fortuitous blend of coincidence and sheer kindness, I found myself extended an invitation into her world. The moment I stepped across the threshold, a profound understanding settled over me. The air itself felt different, warm, yet not heavy, imbued with the delicate, lingering scent of tea and aged wood, a fragrance like a cherished memory. The room was strikingly simple, almost devoid of elaborate decoration, yet it felt more complete, more harmonious than any space I had ever encountered. There was no clutter to distract, no discordant noise, not even the subtle hum of modern electronics vying for attention. Just a quiet, resonant presence that compelled you to take a deep, slow breath, to simply be. Noro greeted me with a graceful bow and a soft, knowing smile. Her posture was straight, her eyes held a remarkable clarity, and her movements, though unhurried, possessed an absolute certainty. She offered me green tea, warm, just slightly bitter, served in simple, unadorned cups. We sat on 2 floor cushions by a low wooden table that seemed to understand its inherent purpose. Initially, my gaze scanned the room, searching for the tangible elements that created such profound peace. Was it the calming hue of the walls? The sparse yet perfectly placed furniture? The way the soft afternoon light filtered across the floorboards? But slowly a deeper realization dawned on me. It wasn't the things themselves. It was the way Noro interacted with them, the silent reverence with which she moved through her own life. There was no rush, no frantic energy, no unnecessary fuss. She folded the small tea cloth with the same gentle, deliberate care one might bestow upon a newborn. Unable to contain my curiosity, I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper, "How do you keep it all so wonderfully calm?" She chuckled softly, a sound like wind rustling through dry leaves, and replied, "I don't clean much. I just never let things fall apart." It was one of those deceptively simple answers that resonates deeply, carrying the accumulated wisdom of decades of lived experience beneath its surface. That day, without ever consciously trying to teach me, Noro unveiled a fundamentally different way of living. Not by striving for absolute control, but by consistently choosing small, intentional acts, moments of gentle care, over and over again. And that, I understood, was the true beginning. The first quiet step on my own journey back to myself. Habit 1. A place for everything and peace in its place. Before the warmth of the tea, before the gentle sound of her voice, the first thing that truly registered within me was the quiet, undeniable order in Noro's home. Nothing was out of place, yet more profoundly, nothing felt forced. The television remote rested perfectly aligned on the low table. Her slippers were neatly pointed towards the doorway, as if patiently awaiting their next use. A towel, meticulously folded, sat centered on a small shelf. It wasn't an artificial, staged perfection. It was as though each item had simply, naturally, found its way home. "Do you spend a lot of time tidying every day?" I ventured, half expecting a detailed schedule. She smiled, shaking her head softly. "No," she replied, her voice a gentle murmur. "I just return things to where they belong." It sounded almost too simplistic, too effortless. But as I continued to observe her quiet movements, a profound truth began to emerge. This wasn't merely about cleaning. It was about respect. Respect for her sacred space, respect for the precious commodity of her time, and ultimately, respect for the deep abiding peace she had meticulously cultivated. My mind immediately drifted to my own home. A stark contrast. The remote could be in any one of 3 different locations. My keys, a perpetual mystery, might be found anywhere from the kitchen counter to the obscure depths of a coat pocket. And the absolute worst, that single, crucial paper I once safely tucked away, only to spend 2 frantic weeks searching for it, utterly unable to recall its hidden sanctuary. I had always rationalized clutter as a sign of a busy, active life, a badge of productivity. But Noro offered a different perspective, a gentler truth. She said, just like people, every object needs a place to belong. If you don't give it one, it will always be lost. And so, too, will your mind. That statement struck me with the force of revelation. I had been living amidst a silent multitude of orphaned things, items that wandered aimlessly without a designated purpose or resting place. And each time I had to embark on a quest for something, I wasn't just losing a few minutes. I was borrowing mental energy from tomorrow, simply to rectify the small, unfinished tasks of today. So I started small, almost imperceptibly. The television remote, just one item, placed back in the exact same spot every single time. This singular act didn't miraculously transform my entire house overnight, but it did something far more significant. It began to transform me. Because that small, repetitive act instilled a quiet sense of control, a subtle ease I hadn't realized I'd lost. No more frantic searching, no more mounting frustration, just one less tiny thread pulling at the fabric of my inner peace. And for now, that was more than enough to keep going. Habit 2, 1-minute decisions that free the mind. We were lingering over our second cup of tea when I observed Noro perform a small, almost imperceptible act. She rose to refill the kettle, and with the very same hand, she effortlessly picked up a small cloth and wiped away a tiny, solitary drop of tea from the polished surface of the table. Just one drop, just one swift wipe. Then she gracefully resumed her seat, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, but I couldn't unsee it. So I leaned forward and asked, why not wait? Why not clean it all later when there's more to do? She met my gaze with eyes that seemed to hold an understanding far deeper than words and simply replied, if it takes less than a minute, I do it now. Not as a rigid rule, not as an unpleasant chore, but as a way of being. In that profound moment, a crucial realization dawned on me. My home wasn't burdened by mess because of massive, overwhelming tasks I continually avoided. It was weighed down precisely because of the countless small ones I habitually postponed. That single dirty teacup I left in the sink? I'll get to it later, I think. Then another cup would join it, then a spoon, and soon a quiet, accusatory pile would stare back at me from the depths of the sink. And the most insidious part wasn't merely the physical mess itself. It was the psychological weight it relentlessly placed on my mind. It was the silent, ever-present to-do list that whispered relentlessly through every room of my house. You haven't done this. You're falling behind again. Noro, however, didn't allow those insidious whispers to take root. She acted gently, immediately, and then, crucially, she let it go. She articulated it perfectly. I don't like carrying unfinished things, not in my house, and certainly not in my head. Those words resonated with me, echoing through nights I'd spent lying awake, unable to truly rest, not from grand worries, but from the incessant hum of countless little undone things that, like persistent shadows, followed me even into my dreams. But when I began to tentatively adopt her method, just once I felt it, a distinct shift. Washing one cup, wiping one counter, returning one pen to its rightful place. It transcended mere tidiness. It was about restoring a sense of flow. And flow, I've since learned, is precisely what peace feels like when it is in motion. So now, before I procrastinate, I pause and ask myself, will this take less than a minute? And if the answer, genuinely, is yes, I do it. Because that single minute, that tiny investment of immediate action, is sometimes all it takes to reclaim the clarity and peace of an entire day. Habit 3. Fewer things, deeper peace. The first time I stepped into Noro's kitchen, it felt like I had somehow entered a memory, a timeless space. Not because it was aged or antique, but because it evoked a simpler era, a time when enough was truly enough. There was one pot, one pan, 2 bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks, each item clearly chosen for its utility and purpose. In her small refrigerator, only precisely what she needed for the coming days resided. No half-empty, forgotten sauce bottles gathering dust. No wilting greens relegated to the back. No just-in-case containers from 3 weeks prior. It wasn't sparse or barren. It was profoundly, beautifully intentional. So I asked her, curious, why don't you keep more? For convenience, perhaps? She offered that gentle smile again, as if she had answered this question countless times before. I used to, she replied, her voice soft, but I realized I don't need convenience, I need clarity. That single word, clarity, struck me with more force than I could have anticipated, because when I cast my mind back to my own kitchen, I saw its absolute antithesis. A fancy juicer I had used precisely once, now gathering dust. 4 mugs I never actually liked, but somehow still owned. A cluttered drawer overflowing with old chipped utensils I couldn't bring myself to discard, perhaps because they were gifts, or perhaps simply guilt. And yet, every time I pulled open that drawer, I felt a tiny internal sigh of overwhelm, as if each unused item was silently questioning its continued presence in my life. Noro didn't live under that kind of unspoken pressure. She articulated her philosophy with elegant simplicity. Everything I own, I use. Everything I keep, I care for. It wasn't merely about superficial organization. It was about a profound, unflinching honesty with herself and with the life she was actively living in the present moment. I began to adopt a similar approach, not embarking on a ruthless purging spree, but instead asking myself, with each item, do I genuinely use this? Does it contribute to my sense of ease? Would I choose to buy this again today? And slowly, quietly, without any dramatic declarations or fanfare, I began to let things go. My goal wasn't to become a strict minimalist, but to become free. Noro once shared a poignant analogy. Keeping too much is like walking with a heavy bag. You can still move forward, but every single step feels significantly harder. She wasn't striving to impress anyone, nor was she consulting self-help books on decluttering. She simply, instinctively chose peace over possessions. And in making that conscious choice, her home began to breathe. And in turn, so did she. Now when I open a drawer and see only what I truly use and cherish, I experience something unexpected, a deep sense of gratitude. Because fewer things don't equate to fewer comforts. They signify more space, more appreciation for the comforts that genuinely matter. Habit 4, 5, and 6. Rituals that protect the soul. It was after dinner, a simple meal of tea and a few crackers, when I observed Noro quietly embark on her evening ritual. There was no announcement, no mental checklist, just a series of small deliberate movements, intentional, graceful, and deeply calming. She gently returned the tea tray to its designated place in the cupboard, washed the 2 cups, drying them with unhurried care, wiped the low table, ensuring its surface was pristine, straightened the chairs, aligning them perfectly, a quick habitual check of the doors, securing her sanctuary, and then a small clean handkerchief and the clothes she intended to wear tomorrow, carefully laid out on the seat of a wooden chair beside her bed. The entire sequence took perhaps 5 minutes, but in those 5 minutes, she didn't just tidy. She closed her day with a profound sense of dignity and completeness. I couldn't help but inquire, "Do you always do this?" She nodded, her soft smile unwavering. "If I end the day in peace," she explained, "I begin the next in peace." That single sentence lingered with me for weeks because I knew its antithesis all too well. Going to bed with dinner dishes still stubbornly sitting in the sink, the kitchen counter a jumble of forgotten items, mail still unopened, a damp towel draped carelessly over a chair like an unfinished, lingering thought. And inevitably, every morning, I would wake up and walk directly back into yesterday's unresolved mess, carrying its weight into the new day. Noro, however, never allowed that cycle to begin. She didn't wait for her home to become a problem that demanded urgent attention. Instead, she gently guided things back into their proper place each night, as if tenderly tucking her home into a peaceful slumber. And then, another subtle pattern emerged from her way of life. Each distinct space within her home had its own clear, undisputed role. The dining table was exclusively reserved for meals. No phones, no burgeoning piles of paperwork. The inviting armchair in the corner was solely for the quiet contemplation of reading, not for endless scrolling or impromptu naps. Her bed, sacredly, was only for sleeping. I realized with a jolt of recognition that my own home was perpetually multitasking, much like myself. I would often eat on the couch, attempt to work at the kitchen counter, and check emails while still in bed. And then I would wonder, confused, why I struggled to truly rest, why my thoughts never seemed to quiet down. Noro's wisdom was simple, yet profound. When your space forgets its purpose, so does your body. So she meticulously assigned each corner of her home a singular defined job and allowed it to fulfill only that purpose. The result was a natural rhythm, a profound sense of calm, a home that actively supported her well-being rather than perpetually confusing or overwhelming her. And perhaps my most cherished part of her evening ritual was a small quiet act she performed just before settling down for sleep. She would pour a glass of water, place it carefully by her bedside, fold her hands in a gesture of quiet contemplation, and whisper, "Tomorrow, I'll begin again." This wasn't a demanding promise of relentless productivity, but a gentle, profound permission to rest fully, deeply, without the insidious burden of guilt. In Noro's harmonious world, preparation wasn't a source of pressure. It was a loving kindness extended to her future self. And I began to understand that these seemingly small rituals weren't about rigid neatness. They were about achieving a deeper, more profound freedom. Habit 7. Gratitude that transforms ordinary into sacred. It was such a subtle gesture. I almost entirely missed its significance. After we had finished our tea, Noro stood, rinsed her cup under the tap, dried it with exquisite care, and then, before placing it back, she pressed her hands together in front of it, offering a gentle nod. Not dramatic, not performative, just a quiet, heartfelt moment of thanks. I, somewhat startled, asked, "Are you praying?" She chuckled softly, the sound like a warm breeze. "No," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "I'm just thanking the cup for serving me today." It truly stunned me. All my life I had washed dishes, stacked them, dried them, and sometimes, if I'm honest, I had even resented them, but I had never once, ever thanked them. Noro patiently elaborated. When you live with very little, You learn to see each item not merely as a possession, but as a companion on your journey. She spoke of an old worn scarf that had faithfully kept her warm through 20 harsh winters, of a small sturdy knife that had precisely chopped every single vegetable she had ever cooked in America, of a humble stool near the window that had cradled her every afternoon as she immersed herself in books, bathed in sunlight. These things, she affirmed, they walk through life with me. They don't speak, but they give constantly. And suddenly a profound realization washed over me. Her home wasn't just tidy, it was alive, not in some mystical supernatural sense, but in the way a vibrant garden flourishes and thrives because someone deeply cares for it, because someone truly notices it. I reflected on my own life, on the countless items I had kept out of sheer guilt, or simply out of ingrained habit. How many times had I impulsively bought something new, only to completely forget the perfectly functional, existing item I already possessed? Noro didn't hoard, but she honored. And through that quiet, consistent honoring, she taught me a lesson I had never gleaned from any book, that gratitude isn't a sentiment reserved solely for people or for special holidays. Gratitude is a daily, living practice. It's embedded in how we carefully fold a towel, in how we mindfully put away a plate, in how we acknowledge the silent, steadfast helpers that quietly simplify our lives. Because when we choose to live this way, even the most ordinary moments and objects are transformed into something sacred. And that's precisely what her home felt like. Not minimalist in the trendy sense, not overtly modern, but deeply, truly sacred. Now, when I gently close the lid on a container or thoughtfully turn off a light in a room, I sometimes whisper, "Thank you." It might sound a little silly even to myself, but it unfailingly brings me a quiet, centering peace. Because in a world that relentlessly bombards us with messages to buy more, achieve more, own more, Noro's profound, quiet gratitude served as a powerful, timely reminder. Sometimes the greatest wealth is simply noticing and cherishing what we already have. Final reflections. This journey with Noro brought me to a powerful truth. It's never, ever too late to begin again, to start over. Before I met her, I mistakenly believed that maintaining an orderly home demanded immense strength, unwavering discipline, or perhaps even the boundless energy of youth. But Noro unveiled a fundamentally different reality. It isn't about raw energy or possessing a meticulously perfect plan. It is, at its core, about relationship. Our relationship with our space, with our precious time, with the everyday objects we touch, and most profoundly, with ourselves. Each habit she embodied wasn't a rigid rule to be followed, but a gentle, organic rhythm that transformed her home from a potential burden into an actual refuge. She didn't clean to impress anyone, nor did she tidy for the sake of mere appearances. She simply, authentically, honored what she had been given. And in doing so, she quietly reminded me of a vital truth I had somehow forgotten. We don't need to orchestrate a complete overhaul overnight. We don't need to endlessly wait for the perfect time, or summon an elusive surge of perfect energy, or even aspire to a perfect house. We can begin, just like Noro, with one single drawer, one solitary cup, one intentional evening ritual. And as I tentatively began to embrace these small, deliberate acts, not everything instantly became perfect, but everything undeniably became lighter. My home didn't expand in square footage, but it grew immeasurably in meaning. And in parallel, so did the richness of my days. If you, dear viewer, have ever felt overwhelmed by your own space, if you've looked around and thought, with a quiet ache, "This isn't me anymore," please hold on to this truth. It's never too late to find your way back home to yourself. Start with one habit, one moment of clarity, and allow that nascent peace to gently, steadily grow from there. Because true peace doesn't arrive like a sudden lightning strike. It is painstakingly, beautifully built, quietly, one soft, intentional choice at a time. Thank you for joining me on this deeply personal journey. If any part of this story resonated with your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might be searching for a little breath of stillness and clarity today. And if you're inspired to take even one small step towards transforming your own space and spirit, tell me in the comments below. What's the one thing you'll return to its proper place tonight? For more insights into creating a life of peace and intention, be sure to subscribe to Elders Insight. Our community at Elders Insight believes in the power of timeless wisdom for modern living. Join us again soon here at Elders Insight as we continue to explore pathways to a more mindful and joyful existence. Your story begins with one choice.